Welcome to the 30th episode of the School Transportation Nation podcast. I'm Tony Corpin, publisher of School Transportation News. This episode is brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software. Today's tech tip is brought to you by Zonar, and we have a special message from the Propane Education Research Council. We'll hear from Steve Whaley, the Director of Autogas Business Development.
I'm Ryan Gray, Editor-in-Chief of School Transportation News. Stay tuned for our second guest a little bit later, Jason Nelson, the Transportation Supervisor for Kyrene School District in Phoenix, Arizona.
Well, Ryan, school is back in session for some in class, some virtual. I know we were talking a little bit about waivers and classes getting back in session for some charter schools and private schools as well. So kind of a mixed bag out there right now.
Yeah, New York City schools last week was the last school district, certainly the largest school district in the nation, to get back to school. So they started with kind of a hybrid model. A lot of schools have been back for over a month. As I mentioned, we're going to talk to Jason down in Phoenix in a little bit, and he's been back. And a lot of folks still, obviously here in California, a lot of virtual. Last week with the Bus Technology Summit, we saw folks from all over the nation, which was great. Finally having a conference. We would have loved to have it in person, of course, but yeah, we heard various stories, right? A lot of folks that were saying, yeah, we're back, or we're doing this AB model hybrid. A lot of folks still, again, at home. A lot of directors were still at home. A lot of our attendees, because their school districts are still doing virtual. Good to see others in their office. So if there's any bit of normalcy, I guess, coming back to this, it's that at least the kids are in one way, shape, or form getting an education. Hopefully school bus is a part of that. But hey, the Pac-12 announced that their football season is going to start up here in about a month or so. The Big Ten did so a couple weeks ago, announced that they're going to start later in October. So, hey, at least college football, college sports seem to be coming back. So hopefully we can keep this train going and get on a roll. And hopefully as we get into 2021, this COVID-19 stuff will start loosening up.
Yeah, school athletics is a big part of school busing, all those field trips to different places, different things. So I think anything that brings a little flavor of normalcy back is going to be a welcome addition to the regular schedule of what children are experiencing out there. And, virtual learning is a huge thing, Ryan. Obviously, we were thrust into that the beginning of this year, and schools have had a chance to kind of regroup, and now they've got a bit more of their tech game on with what they can do to provide access to education for children, because really that digital divide between children that have kind of an economic challenged home, they don't have access to internet. They can't get the internet they need to be successful at school. And it's very disturbing, right? And so school transportation to the rescue, Wi-Fi, hot topic at the Bus Technology Summit. We had Max Christensen on the podcast last week, and he talked a little bit about what Iowa was doing and how their 327 school districts have access to $20 million in funding for school bus Wi-Fi. And we're starting to see that kind of come out into the market and a little more awareness around those types of topics. I mean, what are you seeing on that?
Yeah, well, along those lines, I mean, you mentioned Iowa getting money, Alabama. I think there's 8 states, I believe, nationwide that are using some of that governor's emergency relief money from COVID-19, from that the CARES Act for school bus Wi-Fi. Not everyone, though, is doing that, even within some of those states that I just mentioned. Alabama, I know one of the districts down there, Baldwin County, they are not utilizing the money for that school bus Wi-Fi because they've already sent out pucks, these Wi-Fi pucks to students. And so again, all over the board, even a lot of districts, as we wrote in the magazine recently, even some of the districts that have been operating school bus Wi-Fi are not utilizing it right now for the virtual learning. Trying to keep that for when buses start rolling again and for field trips, just some concerns about physical distancing, range of the Wi-Fi signal, whatnot. But in other areas, it's working fine. Prime example of that we got a sneak preview of at the Bus Technology Summit last week. If people were paying attention to one of the chat sessions, Rhonda Lyons, who's the Director of Transportation for Wayne Westland Community Schools in Detroit, she put out a message and said, hey, everybody, CBS Evening News is going to be profiling what we're doing with Wi-Fi. And sure enough, late last week, CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell profiled a little bit of what Wayne Westland is doing. Their superintendent mentioned that 40% of their families there, according to their surveys, lack the needed internet for this remote learning. So they've outfitted 21 of their school buses with mobile hotspots. And they're also going to soon be using those school buses to deliver lunches. So it just shows, again, a big topic or point made at the Bus Technology Summit last week, too, was that, what's good for the goose isn't necessarily good for the gander. And that's nothing new for student transportation, right? It's always been predicated on local control and what makes sense for local districts. You could be in one district and next door, what you do doesn't make sense for them. So it was really good to have that sharing and dialogue. Interesting to see what Wayne Westland is doing and hear what other folks are doing in terms of Wi-Fi. Definitely where it's needed and where it's being used, it serves a purpose. Hopefully we can get more money for school bus Wi-Fi. I know that there's been efforts made on the federal level over the last couple of years with some legislation that's been introduced to try to get FCC to allow school bus Wi-Fi as part of the E-rate funding that goes to school libraries and school buildings for internet connectivity. Comes back to the school bus as an extension of the classroom. And we keep saying that every day, it seems like. Getting the larger educational community, the larger governmental community, society to really give school bus its just due.
Yeah, Ryan, one of our sponsors of this episode, Zonar, a leader in smart fleet management, was the title sponsor of the Bus Technology Summit last week. And they want to thank everyone who attended. And they're super proud to be the winner of the most innovative app at the first ever BTS Innovation Awards. And if you missed any content from Zonar or just any content from the Bus Technology Summit, you got to go to bustechsummit.com to watch the tech talk by their president and CEO, Ian McCurlick, and their great product demo on the OTA app. You can read more stories, the recap, the conversations that attendees were having, the presentations, cutting edge technology around the industry. And you can check that out on stnonline.com and search Bus Tech Summit. And to learn more about Zonar solutions for COVID-19, visit zonarsystems.com/protect. That's zonarsystems.com/protect.
So obviously we are nowhere near out of the woods yet with COVID-19. Past the very unfortunate milestone last week of over 200,000 now in the U.S. who have died from COVID-19. Reuters reporting late last week that there are now over 7 million COVID-19 cases across the country, with the Midwest really surging in their outbreak. And that's been a concern that I've seen for a couple weeks now. CDC has mentioned that other places of the country down south for a while was getting really bad. Of course, we have our issues out here out west. They have their issues up in the Northeast, but the Midwest is where it's really hitting now. And there's been some reports lately, too, that younger adults, younger Americans are really getting hit by COVID-19 now. And maybe they're still not having the horrible symptoms that older folks are having, or those with compromised immunity. But still, it's just, it's ongoing. And certainly with a lot of kids back in a lot of states on school buses, there remains that concern from school bus drivers. That was something we'd heard over the summer. Was a lot of school bus drivers were very reticent to go back. Teachers have been saying that too. But with that said, a lot of folks are very happy to be back. And, despite all that, something that grabbed my attention last week was a headline I read out of Polk County Public Schools in Central Florida. They had some school bus drivers who anonymously have turned to Facebook or even, being interviewed to discuss that they aren't being told by their employer when the children on their buses are contracting COVID. Because as we've seen, there have been some schools that have gone back to virtual learning. They were in class, they went back to virtual because of some COVID cases that happened. It was inevitable. We know that. But I reached out to Polk County Public Schools for a comment on that because, I thought it was very timely because at the Bus Technology Summit last week, Matthew Doss from Marks Wendell law firm in New York City really took us through the legal aspects of adhering to the guidance that we're receiving from CDC and state departments and local health departments and whatnot. And he talked a lot about privacy laws. And really what Polk County told me was that due to privacy laws, they can't identify anyone who has tested positive. So it's against federal law for them to tell the bus drivers, hey, Johnny got COVID, FYI. We're going to have to quarantine you. We're going to have to increase our measures against this. But with that said, they are, as well as I'm sure a lot of districts across the country, anytime there is a positive case, they are sending a school-wide notification through their automated messaging system, School Messenger. So, they're working with the Florida Department of Health. For the last few weeks, the Transportation Department has been following a new practice for communicating with transportation employees. That's what Jason Gary, who is the coordinator of media relations down there in Polk County, told me. And they're also receiving word through this automated messaging system. So it really comes back to, there's a lot of misunderstanding out there right now, and this thing is still evolving every day. So, a lot of accusations flying around. It's really hard to keep a level head in this environment. And really what it comes back to is Matt Doss's advice that he gave all our Bus Technology Summit folks last week. And that was, hey, you got to meet the threshold of reasonable care, which our readers and our audience and our listeners, they're very used to doing that anyways. Obviously, things have changed. And what makes it so confusing is all the various competing guidance sometimes that's flowing around out there. And Matt said basically, hey, look, you gotta do your absolute best to whatever the guidance is, no matter how much it changes, to follow it. Something that I've said repeatedly over the summer was, hey, these seem to be really recommendations, and we're hearing from school districts that they're doing what they have to do. It was a little bit sobering, the things that Matt said, but he was basically like, hey, treat it as the Bible. That just throws some additional complexity into these school transportation operations. But it was very heartening to know that Polk County, they said, hey, we are doing the best we can to inform our employees of what's going on with students, what's going on with COVID-19 outbreaks, but we have to follow the law. We have to follow the federal law. We have to follow the state law. And that was to Matt's point. So very interesting as we talk to more and more districts and they're saying, oh, well, either our state doesn't have guidance or we're doing the best we can, or we just decided that social distancing isn't possible. Really, this news gives you some pause. So good luck to everyone out there. My heart's with you, but really tough times together as an industry. There's so much good work that has been done over the past several decades, many decades, and that continues to happen. So again, thank you to all those leaders out there who were part of the Bus Technology Summit, who helped bring some of these messages of how to use technology and how to adopt technology, how to incorporate your staff into those decisions, and most importantly, not losing sight of that human aspect. That needs to remain the focal point. So, Tony, obviously, like I said, we're not out of the woods yet, but hopefully 2021, I keep saying it, hopefully that has some better things lined up for us.
One thing that really stood out to me, Ryan, from the Bus Technology Summit was Jim Harris's Tech Talk. He said something really interesting. He had framed up the idea of we see things in different frames. Depending on the situation, it really determines how people behave, how we behave, and it influences the result. And changing the frame will basically change everything in how we do things. So just as you mentioned, people have it framed up one way that they can't do certain things. And I'm sure listeners have a different opinion on how they would deal with the situation based on their frame, right? And I think that's a very interesting point, right? Because we really talked about this a lot at Bus Technology Summit. And I believe that the way he quoted somebody that was an associate or educator, Mr. Stephen Covey, we don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. And that just is a very informative quote that really people need to be aware with all these changes and all these situations. We give a lot of information, but depending on your situation or your frame, you're going to be able to deal with things different. Hey, STN, we can't do live conferences. Guess what we did? We created a virtual conference, Bus Technology Summit. And what an amazing conference we had last week. We had so many great presentations to pick from. And if you missed TransFinder's Tech Talk, you missed something really amazing, like their connected technology discussion on how your technology components better talk to each other if you're in trouble, or following that talk, how TransFinder's Route Finder Plus and Stop Finder products go together like coffee and donuts. And no one will forget TransFinder's peace plan that TransFinder CEO Antonio Civitella presented. If you missed any one of these talks, TransFinder would love to hear from you. Just email Tony, Tony, at transfinder.com, and either Tony personally or one of his team will get back to you. I want you guys to stay tuned. We got some great interviews coming up. Thanks for listening. I want to welcome to the podcast Steve Whaley, Director of Autogas Business Development of the Propane Education Research Council. Steve, welcome.
Tony, thank you a whole lot for having me. It's great to be here, and it's great to have, some schools starting back up this fall too.
Most definitely. We agree with that. We're looking forward to school startup. And I know you guys are the expert in propane and propane auto gas. What's going on with that lately? Can you give me some updates on recent developments or maybe some studies that you guys have been doing?
Sure. We actually crested our 20,000 propane bus market milestone this year. So it has been a tremendous success implementing propane into the school bus transportation sector. 20,000 buses in over 1,000 school districts and contractor fleets. And when school is fully open, moving 1.25 million students to and from school every day on a very clean propane-powered bus. We're super excited about that, as well as what we've been able to accomplish in the emissions reduction. We started off just doing the environmental aspect for school buses with getting rid of that particulate matter, and propane, unlike the diesel bus, doesn't have to have a particulate matter filter because we don't generate any of it. So it's a lot less maintenance for the school districts to take care of in cost savings.
Wonderful. I know you guys have an upcoming webinar with us, Propane Auto Gas, the right fuel for your fleet of school buses. You want to give us a sneak preview on maybe what you're going to be talking about?
Sure. We're going to do some cost analysis because, Tony, when it all comes down to it, if it's not technology you can afford, it's not going to be sustainable. So we're going to talk about the incremental cost of what it takes to do a propane bus compared to all of the other energy sources, including diesel. And then we're going to do an environmental analysis that's going to rock people's world because we're actually much cleaner than EV buses in 38 states right now. And when we start using renewable propane, we're cleaner in every state compared to the electric grid. We'll go through all of that on the webinar coming up.
Wonderful. And Steve, if I'm interested in purchasing a propane auto gas school bus, who makes those? Who are your OEM partners?
Oh, all of them. We have partnerships that have developed. And so we have IC with propane powered options. We have Bluebird with propane powered option and Thomasville with propane powered options. Matter of fact, in my home state of South Carolina, Thomasville just deployed 75 of them through the Volkswagen settlement funds. And one of them actually was per request from a special needs student at League Academy right in my hometown of Greenville. And it was a wonderful story on the news just the other night.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for jumping on the podcast. I also want to remind everybody the webinar is going to be hosted by PERC. It's going to be on October 14th. Be sure and go on the stnonline.com website. Click on that multimedia tab to be added to participate in the webinar. Steve, thanks so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate you and the Propane Education Research Council.
Thanks a whole lot, Tony. We'll see you on October 14th.
Our transportation director of the week is Jason Nelson, transportation supervisor for Kyrene School District in Arizona, joining us today. Jason, how's it going?
It is going very well. Thank you for asking. How about everybody there over at SDN?
Oh, we're doing well. We just are recouping, if you will, from our virtual bus technology summit that we held last week. Lots of work put in by our staff, so we're all catching up on our sleep over the weekend. We're re-energized and we're back ready to go. So thanks for joining us today. I know it's still pretty hot out there in Arizona, both temperature wise and back to school wise. So I know you've caught a lot of our podcast episodes over the summer, and we've been talking to different transportation directors and supervisors about their plans to get back to school. Well, you guys are entering phase 2. So tell us about that.
Correct. Yep. So here we've been actually on the governor's order. We were to phase in initial back to school learning August 17th. So we've had most of our special needs students that needed to be in school, for that in-person learning that couldn't actually do the virtual learning. They've been back since the 17th. We brought back kinder, first and second, and then the 24th was our phase 2 of third through fifth grade coming back, taking our elementary students into fall break. Again, hard to believe that we're already looking at October. And so our phase 3 will actually be after fall break, bringing back our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders back to school for in-person learning for those families that are electing to come back to the physical brick and mortar classrooms. So that's kind of what our 3-phase approach looks like as of right now, going into quarter 2 for school.
So all those students back on the bus, what's it actually looking like? We've talked so much about hypotheticals and trying to follow federal and state and local guidance. What are you actually seeing on the buses? Yeah,
so we've really actually seen about 50% of our actual ridership that we normally have, which kind of aligns with what we're anticipating. As far as kids being back, I think a lot of people get in their heads about, kids can't keep their masks on, but they keep them on all day. And we really haven't seen a whole lot of issues as far as mask wearing on the bus. Our district chose to take a standpoint of not actually requiring the physical distancing on the bus. We're trying to keep students that have more than one student in the family sitting together. We're really only seeing about 15 to 20 kids per route out of, I've got 370 individual runs. I think there's about 140 individual runs that have 20 or less students on them scheduled right now. So really able to kind of just intermittently do that physical distancing because the space allows for it right now. But as students come back in quarter 3, back out of the flex learning and digital learning options, if their parents elect for them to come back to school, we could potentially see anywhere from, I would guess, 500 to, maybe another 1,000 students coming back in January after the winter break.
Mm-hmm. And how many buses do you have in your fleet? And how many are you actually running on routes right now?
We have 130 in our fleet. We've done, a few things just over the last couple of years to work on just some efficiencies, but we run about 77 actual full routes and then 10 van routes that handle our homeless population through the valley here in Phoenix.
So you're not really doing physical distancing per se on the bus, although, the numbers are way down.
Sure.
But what about, you mentioned you're transporting students with disabilities. What's that looking like in reality? There was a lot of concern and continue to be so about the close quarters that bus drivers and monitors need to keep to get those kids in their child safety restraints, wheelchair lift, secure them into the bus, just be close to them, depending on whatever their special need, their health needs are.
Sure.
What's actually happening? What are the bus drivers reporting back to you, the monitors reporting back to you in terms of their concerns, how the students are reacting to kind of this new normal?
Yeah, I think everybody's been, for those that chose to stick with us through this process, I think we're very aware of what the ramifications might be. And our district requires all of our employees to wear masks through the day. So they're required on the bus at all times. Students, obviously, those that can wear masks are encouraged to do so, but we know that there are several students that have those, issues or troubles breathing, maybe just not able to wear the mask just because it gives them that anxiousness. So we're working around that. And our district has a long list of mitigation strategies, both in the classroom and the school bus, that we're expected to follow. We do sanitation in between each run of basically just taking like a spray bottle with a chemical and spraying the high touch surface areas in between routes to make sure that we're limiting who comes in contact with those seat surfaces and whatnot. We do require students they have hand sanitizer that they put on their hands as they're coming on the bus. And really, I mean, I think that the big takeaway for me is that the big unknown, and now that we're in our routes, it's really been business as usual, other than just wearing the mask and the extra cleaning procedures on the bus. I haven't really seen or heard of anybody that's really been in an uproar about, this is ridiculous that we can't do this. Everybody's just really kind of grabbed the bull by the horns and run with it. And just, I think everybody's just really happy to be back at work and working with their kids.
Definitely. So as a past president of the Transportation Administrators of Arizona, I know you're very tapped into what's going on around the state. Are you hearing anything different or other challenges from some of your compatriots out there at other districts?
Yeah. One of the big things is that, our state hasn't really come out and given us a one size fits all as some of the other states maybe in the nation that have. So our state has really left the decision making up to most of the districts to decide schedule and sanitation procedures and just what the school year is going to look like for this year coming back out of our break from COVID. So I know a lot of people right now, really, I would assume that this is probably nationwide, but are really struggling with their shortage of employees. But again, even outside of transportation, when you talk about the daily schedule of just how students come to school, we've heard of districts that are going from a 5-day school week to a 4-day school week. We've heard of last name alphabetical, like an alternate A-B schedule. So A through M would go Tuesday and Friday, and maybe N through Z goes through, Monday and Wednesday or something along those lines. So everybody's really just trying to struggle to figure out how to make that work for their transportation departments. I think for most of us bigger districts, I should say, have really just taken the kind of the same approach as we have, in that wearing masks, we're not going to really focus too much on physical distancing on the bus, and, just trying to run our routes and keep things as normal as possible.
Mm-hmm. And I was mentioned in the Bus Technology Summit last week. You were an attendee there. You guys using a lot of technology there in Kyrene in the Phoenix area?
Yes, definitely. One of the things I'm very fortunate to be a part of here is that our district really embraces a lot of the technology that's out there. There's still some that we're working on. We're trying to get the student tracking and tablets onto our bus, but we do a lot with GPS and safety scorecards, and really work with our driving staff on development of their driving habits. And we meet with them on a monthly basis in safety meetings and talk about their safety scores, from GPS to the routing side to our own scorecards that we've really created on our own. We do just a lot when you talk about KPIs and goal setting within the department. We're always just looking at how can we do things better and kind of just making sure that we're doing what we set out to.
Definitely a big part of it. And you mentioned it, driver training. We prefaced our Let's Talk chat sessions last week at BTS with a session specifically on driver training, both from the standpoint, of course, when you guys had to shut down in the spring, you needing to keep in touch with your drivers and staff, and, a lot of times indoctrinating a lot of those folks that weren't used to doing Zoom type meetings or texting or whatever the technology you were using. And then there's the training aspect too of adopting the technology. We talked a lot about utilizing the school bus drivers as a focus group, or, relying on their feedback. What are their needs?
Sure.
That's a big part of this as well. So much that it has been going into operations and into the thought process this year, this summer, now into the fall. One of the big boons to Arizona and to the nation really was speaking of podcasts, we started our podcast in March. You started a podcast as well. Hey, Bus Driver. A lot of our listeners will probably know that. Tell us about Hey, Bus Driver.
Yeah, so kind of came as an idea. I'm fortunate to work with a lot of great people. And as you mentioned earlier, just working through TAA and being a part of that and some of the other organizations that I work with and kind of consult through, I think it really, you can see this from BTS, just how much great conversation comes out of networking. And you sit there and you say, just like we are right now, right? How does this work? And how does this work? And we're putting this information out there. Why should we reinvent the wheel? And so the idea just kind of came to, why not record it and put it somewhere where people can go search it and go back and listen to it? That's kind of where the idea came from. And so I was looking to, we were trying to see would it be beneficial for us to do it from an organizational standpoint through TAA or somebody else. And I just, kind of just decided to spin it up on my own. So we're coming up on our 20th episode here by the end of October. And, it's really just been an interesting array of different episodes and talking to vendors and talking to people like myself. And the idea is just really putting information out there, right? We all have these issues that we could talk about and maybe just bring interesting people on to brainstorm so that we can continue to move this industry forward. I think that's really what I'm hoping to get out of it. And I've got several topics to talk about going forward. I'm kind of targeting, hopefully I can make it to the 4-year mark, and that will be as many episodes as I can probably come up with. But definitely COVID's given us a lot to talk about. And so that's really how the podcast came to be.
So for all our listeners who have not listened to Hey Bus Driver, where do they find you?
www.heybusdriver.com, on social media, Instagram or Facebook, Hey Bus Driver Podcast on both platforms, also on LinkedIn if you want to find us through that. Anywhere that you can search Hey Bus Driver on any podcast streaming platform, they're out there to listen to.
Great. Well, you really took the bull by the horns, shows tremendous leadership. You're a young man still, looking forward to some exciting stuff from you as you lead Arizona and, the nation. One of the reasons why you were named one of our rising stars in our October issue that's coming out in a day or so. Congratulations on that. And all of our listeners, be sure to go over to stnonline.com. October 1st, the issue will be there. You can read all about Jason and the other 9 folks that we profile. Jason, well-deserving honor for you. Congratulations. I know a lot of the hard work is still ahead of you as you transition into phase 2 and then phase 3 of your back-to-school programs and getting all those kids back to school. So I know there's a lot of work ahead of you. We really appreciate you sharing some of your valuable time coming on with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate what STN does for the industry and excited to see how this whole thing grows as we all continue down this interesting path of what's ahead of us.
Special thanks to Jason Nelson and Steve Whaley for joining us today on the podcast. Shout out to this episode's sponsors, TransFinder, Zonar, and the Propane Education Research Council. Ryan and I want to thank all our listeners. Thank you for those that attended the Bus Technology Summit as well. You can catch that content on bustechsummit.com, also stnonline.com for all that great information. We'd love to hear from you. Email us at info@stnmedia.com for your questions, discussion topics. If you have an opinion on something we discussed today or any of our podcasts, we'd love to hear from our listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Check us out at stnpodcast.com. Subscribe, tell your friends, post us on social. We love you, listeners. We love you, School Transportation Nation. We'll see you next time.